storytelling is storytelling. You just need to understand the parameters of the story that you want to tell, or establish the parameters that you want to tell.
As an artist, you sort of have a different kind of eyes to look at the reality. But of course, sometimes you are not the only artist. There are some other artists with whom you can bounce ideas upon. But sometimes you can be alone in a certain location, and we can be pretty lonely.
There's some mystery novels that can also have a very complex social critique, and that's why I started to write the Blades mysteries, because I wanted to sort of not only write something that was fun and entertaining, but I also wanted to talk about my experience and the experience of growing up.
Obehi, the author of the storytelling series for small businesses and content creators. In Obehi Podcast, we talk about the power of your story, your narrative, and why you should own your voice. Whether you are a small business owner, a content entrepreneur, or you simply want to build your influence, storytelling is probably going to be your best instrument to connect with your audience. So join the awakened few who are owning their voices. Now let's get started with today's episode.
Well, my name is Glenville Lovell. I'm from the island of Barbados in the Caribbean. I grew up in a small village that was surrounded by plantation. So the myths or plantation mythology and spirits connected to enslaved people who worked on plantations were very much a part of my early storytelling years, listening to stories from my grandmother and parents. And I think it and at some point played a role in what I decided to write about and the things that I wrote about, both as a novelist and a playwright. So currently I'm writing in both styles. I write novels and also I write plays. But I was introduced to the world of the arts as a dancer and spent a number of years traveling as a dancer until an injury sort of cut short my dance career, and I decided to put my creative impulses and urges into something else that I'd also dabbled in as a youngster, and loved, but didn't really have the time, or was just too frivolous to think of myself as a writer. So that's essentially my story.
Thank you so much for that. Now I'm just sort of wondering,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of curiosity did you have as a child about storytelling? Because now you were talking about storytelling, about the plantation. That sort of
Mm-hmm.
got me curious. Tell me something more about that.
Well, I think one of the things that writers from the diaspora or post-colonial writers struggle with, I believe, because I don't think I'm the only one, but is how do you connect to the world that was basically obliterated by the colonial experience? How do you connect to that life, that beating heart of Africa that was beaten out of you, but it still exists somewhere? And so I think my curiosity started when I just realized, as a young boy growing up in a village that was predominantly Black, that there was these forces around us in the plantation that basically controlled all of our lives. It basically controlled, when they work, how they work, and they owned very little. The plantation, even though slavery had been abolished over 100 years, still controlled everything. So I was curious about what was it about us, this group of Black people, that we were in this condition, and the fact that there was really nothing to point me to why this situation existed the way it did, because the the elders didn't really talk about the conditions before. They talked about what they're experiencing currently, but trying to get them to talk about the past and what what they endured was very difficult. So that's where the curiosity began, and I couldn't really unearth anything. I didn't have the tools, the mental capacity at that age, 10, 11, 12, to excavate any of this from the past. But I knew that it existed, and it left me with a sort of a hollow feeling for a long time, because I knew that there was this thing that was missing, and there was no way, and no one was really giving me an understanding as to why our lives were so marginalized, and had basically no value to the outside world. And so when I began as a storyteller, um, I, I I tried to find the gaps that I could get into, and listen deeper and further. And I went back to unravel some of the myths and stories that were told to me growing up, so that I could try to fit them into this grand scheme of things. And that curiosity, of course, I think still exists in me today, because the stories that exist are like gold. They're buried, and you have to really spend time mining, especially your subconscious, to try to bring the flavor and the spice of that environment to life, and to let it mingle and coalesce into some vision that sort of explains why you are who you are, and why you're where you ended up.
Hmm. Thank you so much for that, dear Lovell. So, at this time that you were still a little bit younger, you were curious of what was going on around you, and you were saying that there were not much material that you could use to sort of evaluate the situation, and to have a kind of a frame of reference, something like that. So,
Right.
did you talk to the elders around you? If you talk to any, who did you talk
Hmm.
to, and what were they telling you about what you were feeling?
Right. Um, I don't. I don't know that I talked to them at that time. I think I went back maybe at some point later on to get not when I felt like I had the ability to voice what I was feeling. But I did listen a lot. I would sit in my semi-dark kitchen that was lit by one lamp somewhere in a wobbly table, and listen to my mother and her friends, and my grandmother, and my great aunts, and listen to them sort of recreate incidents in their lives. And one of the things that I realized as I grew older, um, that what these women were doing is that they were forming sort of a spiritual bond that was sort of healing them from some of the pain that they experienced. And because I know that there was one thing that they weren't talking about, and I don't know if I ever asked them about it, but I know that at some point I may have had some contact with someone who basically would try to give you the impression that what you think about their lives is not necessarily as bad as, they try to basically say, well, our lives are okay. The the slavery didn't really damage us as much as people might think, but and I accepted it at that point because I didn't know any better. So the things that they were telling me did not necessarily, make sense when I look at the lives that they were living, because they were all desperately poor. They didn't have access to, you know, they ate well because they grew their own food, but in terms of material things, that the houses were basically, shacks. They couldn't send their children to proper schools. So the environment that we lived in didn't, um, at least in my view, as a kid, make sense when I looked at the larger society. But the people seemed happy, which was really confusing to me, and I guess I was somewhat happy growing up too. But the thing that I think that made a difference for me was that I had this ability to self-reflect. My personality lended itself to what would I call self-reflection and introspection. So I would think a lot about these things, even when I was 10, 11. And so when I started to go to one of the fancy high schools, which you had to pass an exam to get to, then I began to really ask questions of because then I started to learn about history, and I would ask questions about what exactly what exactly happened. How did we get here? How did you endure? How did our ancestors endure? And most of the time they would tell me, you don't need to think about that. That's in the past. Um, that's not something that we think about. So I got the sense that everyone was afraid of talking about the past. But then I realized it wasn't that they were afraid, is that collectively, through some process of survival technique, they had managed to convince themselves that the past didn't matter. And I it made me sad, because I realized that was the beginning of the death of a culture. This willingness to assume that amnesia is the only way for you to survive.
So, help me understand this. If you were to say,
Mhm.
okay, in your writing, this is the kind of message that is running through them, what would you
Mhm.
say that is? Then, of course, we're going to be looking into the specific of your work just now.
Right. Um, well, I think the the pull of the past is very strong for me. Uh, Again, because of growing up the way I grew up, and having this desire to understand how it is that my people, Black people, people of African origin, were living in this situation where they were, predominantly subservient to white people. It made me want to understand that past. And so I think the current running through most of my stories, not all of them, because I've written some detective crime fiction, but my quote unquote literary novels have a lot to do with that quest to understand, um, you know, the history of my people, and for as long as we know, human beings have told stories. So, and so I think of myself as a storyteller, because I realize that one of the ways to try to get to this understanding is to listen to the stories, and try to recreate some of the stories. Um, and some of it involve myth making, because sometimes you don't, not sometimes, most of the time in our situation, because our history and our culture was pretty much stolen and destroyed. You have to find the space that you can recreate some of the beliefs and the customs that healed and can energize the spirit. And so as a storyteller, my primary purpose is to create, a story that will entertain, because if you don't entertain, then people don't have a chance to get the subliminal message that you may be trying to impart. And and so the discovery of something new, something hidden about myself is sort of part of, and about my culture as well, is part of that search. But I think the overall um, desire to have a sense of self, a sense of place, a sense of who these people are, and why we are in a state where most of our history is forgotten, is a lot of what um, drives me to create the plays and the stories that I write. Because there's this fear deep, certainly in Barbadian society. I can't say all of the Caribbean, but certainly in Barbadian society, that you shouldn't challenge or dig beneath the surface, because the the pain is too great, and we don't need to go through that. And I disagree with that, because I think it's pessimistic. Because I think when you dig beneath the surface, you develop a kind of self-confidence when you have the knowledge that you've triumphed over all of this, and you can embrace and retell your own stories, and reshape yourself, your own identity in the midst that um you know and I think that brings self-confidence. So I reject that idea that you shouldn't, focus on the past because of all the scabs and warts that exist. And you know, because I think it's the way to make the present relevant, if you understand what that past was.
This is very important for me, you see, because we're talking
Hmm.
about storytelling, and storytelling is central to everything we do here. And we sort of
Right,
try to encourage people to continue to leverage the power of storytelling because
right.
it is important. Now, tell me about how other people were also reacting to this kind of curiosity that you were having. I don't know if you have other people of your age mate who were sort of also concerned, because now as
Right.
an artist, you sort of have a different kind of eyes to look at
Hmm.
the reality. But of course, sometimes you are not the only artist. There are some other artists with whom you can bounce ideas upon. But sometimes
Right.
you can be alone in a certain location, and we can be pretty lonely. And so I'm trying to
Hmm.
understand if within you there were other people who were sort of with whom you were sort of reflecting on idea and sharing idea together. And what were they
Right.
saying?
Right. That's a good question, because, as you know, being a writer yourself and a storyteller, is that it can be a very lonely process. And when my first novel came out, Fire in the Canes, well, prior to that, I had no one really, because part of the fear of engaging with the past is that nobody writes about it, and so any writing that was going on, were attempting to write about, contemporary situations. And but I went in my first novel. I went way back into, like, just like 50 years after the abolition of slavery, is when the first novel was set. Most other writers, the few that there were, even though they were writing about post-colonial Caribbean, they were more writing about the 20th century. What was going on, and they were dealing with, the British influence, but they were not going as far back as I tried to do. And so there was no one that I could talk to, because at the time there were very few writers in Barbados. But what I found really encouraging was that the reception of that novel, and still today, many people will say that that novel was sort of like a coming out for them, an eye opener, and in that these were ideas and thoughts that they had, but no one else was referencing them. No one else was trying to connect the realities of today with the evolution of the society from the abolition of slavery. So to answer your question really directly, I didn't have any influences and I didn't have anyone to bounce ideas off of. I was basically flying blind. And I took a leap of faith. I decided that I wanted to tell a personal story, even though, it doesn't seem to reflect as a personal story because it's not a coming on age story of a young man in in the 1970s or when I was a teenager. But it was personal in the sense that it was my attempt to embrace and reshape some of what I was able to glean from the stories that my grandmother and my mother and those older folks were telling, because they would talk about because the novel is about a man who is capable of being a shape shifter and how he used that quality to get the village that he lived in to see the past that they experienced, and to see that there were a people of great future and a people that had wonderful qualities, and they were not supposed to be this group that was under the foot of a plantation. So in a sense, I interpreted the stories that I was hearing from my grandmother and and the older folks as defiance against the plantation, even though I don't know if they were telling it as such, but they would talk about these people that they were aware of who were able to change their shapes, and people who would rebel against what the plantations were doing, and who would so those were the stories that I used. So and a lot of Barbadians began to start examining again the realities of their condition, and looking at it through the eyes of this defiant character. I wish I'd had writers at that time who were doing the kinds of stuff that I tried to do in Fire in the Canes, but I have to say there was really nobody else. That's why I think the novel sort of infused such delight and confidence in a lot of other writers.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, sometimes it's a lonely journey.
Yes,
Sometimes it's a lonely journey. All right. Could you tell me something more about your first novel, your first stories? I think those are important for people. And okay, now we understand where you are coming from, but if you could share more light about that.
right. Um, well, I think my first stories were, sort of vain attempts to copy this writer, a Barbadian writer by the name of Timothy Callender, who wrote, stories sort of in Bajan dialect, and they were funny. So I think when I was in high school, I would write stories in that vein and read them to my friends at school, and they would laugh because we were there trying to learn the king's or queen's English, but here I was writing stories that basically related to how we lived and grew up in our village. But I never took that to mean that I was going to become a writer. But I guess I'd always had the interest in the power, as you quite well alluded to, and the power of storytelling, because in storytelling, you can begin to develop, not only the self confidence about who you are, and but you begin to see yourself in the way that you think is the correct image, because when people try to tell your story, they will create whatever image they see, and so you have to create your own image and your stories, and make sure that they don't get cannibalized. Um, so when I got to Fire in the Canes, because there was a period between there when I was just dancing, I, I was acquiring the confidence, I think, to begin telling stories. And I always had this image, um, in my head of women who, coming home from the plantations in their being so exhausted and tired that they would be dragging, and that image, for some reason, it always stayed with me, because it just spoke to just how desperate their lives were, and it seemed to have an effect on their soul and their spirit, because even when they were not on the plantation, they would walk around with their heads down. So I asked a woman one time, "What are you looking for? Why are you guys always walking with your head down? Is there something that you lost?" Because I thought, well, these women have lost stuff. And of course, they were not appreciative of that kind of sarcasm. I don't know if it was sarcasm. I may have actually been um, serious, But when I started to write, I started to ask myself, what what is it that we really lost? What is it that we are looking for as a Barbadian people? What is it that we don't have that we should have? And the answer to me was, um, an understanding of who we are, and beyond just bodies that exist in space and that live and eat. What is our spiritual connection to the world, and do we know it, or do we just accept that it is whatever, people who write about the Caribbean, who write about the history of the Caribbean, say it is. So so Fire in the Canes, started out as that. This is a story about a woman who is actively searching for a lost child, and it grew into this story where, it's people in this small village. It's a village called Monkey Road, and all of them still work on the plantation, except a few, um, and they're not really free in their existence. And then this man moves into the village, a man by the name of Prince Johnson, and he's a descendant of a runaway slave wood carver who was referred to as the African. And the African was part of a group of enslaved Africans who rebelled and were caught and were burnt, but no one knew where the bones were. So Prince possesses this unique ability to be able to, become a dog, an animal, bird, whatever he felt like. So he would use these qualities to rain terror on the plantation. He would basically just do all kinds of mischievous things, set fire to the canes. He would set fire to the canes. He would go in and steal stuff, and he's one of the few people who refused to work on the plantation. But exactly, he's that, this is not me. So, but Prince also has another quality, that he doesn't even know exactly the power of. He has a mask that was made by his great great grandfather, the African. And when you put this mask on your face, it basically transports you into the world of the African's life, the world of slavery and their attempt to run away from the plantation. And it's through this mask that one of Prince's sons receive a message from this same ancestor, which guides them to the discovery of the bones that were burnt, the Africans that were burnt who tried to escape. And this realization, because up to that point the village was basically trying to forget that they were even slaves, realizes how powerful that power is to be able to reconnect to the spirits of the ancestors, and it lifts the village from that malaise that they were existing in into a state of freedom where they started to pool money to buy land and create a world of their own. So that's the essence of Foreign Canes.
That's powerful. That is really interesting.
Thank, thank you, thank you.
All
It
right.
really did have it really did have a huge effect, like I said, on because again these were stories that no one else in Barbados had ever told and published, and the fact that it was my very first novel also was made a difference. But it's to even now a lot of people will reference that book because of how it presented Barbados, and how it recreated the essence of the spirit of the people who were trying to escape the clutches of slavery. Still has a powerful effect on them.
Thank you for that. All right. Now, I'm sort of curious. What is your interest in crime novel? Why are you interested in that genre?
Oh, well, that is a good. So when I was growing up, and I'm sure you did too, I read a lot. I read everything. I read Agatha Christie because we were British educated, so I read a lot of the British mystery writers, and even some of the Americans as well. And the thing about crime novels and mystery novels and those kinds of novels is that it's a direct line of storytelling. You get a protagonist, you get a villain, you get some action, and they don't waste a lot of time sort of getting too deep into philosophy. um, and so the novels are entertaining and they're fun. You can read them quickly. So I've always had a fascination with the novels, but one of the things I discovered as I grew deeper as a writer is that there's some mystery novels that can also have a very complex social critique, and that's why I started to write the Blades mysteries, because I wanted to sort of not only write something that was fun and entertaining, but I also wanted to talk about my experience and the experience of not growing up, sorry, moving to New York and being an outsider. Because in a lot of ways, I felt like an outsider in Barbados because the country, even though it's majority black, and was run basically by a cabal of white people. It was sad, and I, I never felt comfortable in that space. I enjoyed my life in Barbados, but I knew that So I came here, and it was similar. I mean, I'm an outsider, and I have to try to understand this country, and so I use the mystery novel because the mystery novels are set in New York. Most of my other novels were set in Barbados, as a way to sort of get close to New York, to understand the underbelly of the depravity that's sort of bubbling in pockets all around New York. And so I use that to examine some of the things that brought me here and the things that I saw, and also some of the things that were introduced to me by my daughter, who was born here, who was mixed. And so she has that experience also of being slightly on the outside, as as she explained to me when she was in high school, how you know she you know she wasn't quite sure how she fitted in, because not only was she mixed, but she was sort of Chinese and black. So people would always kind of think she's Puerto Rican and all kinds of other things. Um, So it was an attempt for me to kind of get closer to the American experience through the eyes of a outsider. And Blaze has Bajan roots because his grandmother is from Barbados, by way of Panama. Because Panama is another sort of very powerful image in Caribbean culture, because a lot of Caribbean people went to Panama to build the Panama Canal because the Americans didn't really want to go there to work. So they imported mostly Caribbean immigrants. That's a whole other story. So yeah, so that's my interest in the crime novels, which I really enjoy writing. Actually, they're a lot of fun. You can really explore a lot of things.
How do you get started to write a crime novel as maybe against other other work that you have
I
written?
know. People ask me that all the time. I have friends who are writers themselves who say, it's like, Glenville, how did you, when I read this first Foreigner Kings, and I read this, it's like night and day. This is like two different people. And I laugh because, I think a lot of times we don't understand just how deep our psyche is if you begin to really plummet, and the capacity that we have to express and explore. It's really just about being open. Because I mean, writing is writing. It's a skill, and once you develop the skill, I think you can pretty much write anything. So it's really your interest. I have a deep interest in the crime fiction because I grew up reading a lot of it. Um, so I have a deep interest in it, and I studied some of the best writers that I read, and I sort of understood how they did what they did. And as I said, the thing that really connected for me was the examination of the milieu, the society around the crime. It wasn't just so much the crime itself, which is interesting to find, or solve the mystery. But I love the creating that world around, and beginning to, because in every society that we live in, um, there is so much greed and violence and corruption, wherever you are, whether you're in America, whether you're in Europe, Africa. I mean, it's just the depravity of humanity is it's stunning. You know what I mean? It's hard to conceptualize that we were all, created to seek out um, joy and pleasure and happiness in our lives, and look at how we've created or what we've done to the world. So there's it's hard not to understand the lure of the crime fiction, because the, the world is just so incredibly damaged and corrupt. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, and that's one. I mean, that's one way to look at the novels. And at least that was the way that I chose. That was the interest to deal with something that's sort of fun to read, but on some level, when you get deeper into the mystery, you realize that there's also this attempt to unravel why is it that human beings are so unbelievably, tragically corrupt and violent and non-caring to a lot of their own kind. Um, so even though it may seem as a separation from the literary novels, and there's some similarities, because I try to create compelling characters no matter where they are, but it's also another way, maybe a quicker way, because you don't have a whole lot of time to meander around in a crime novel, because people want to get to you know who killed who and how they got killed, all that stuff. But you also have a chance um, to delve into some aspects of the society that people who don't necessarily want to read literary fiction will wade through to get to the other side.
What do people usually tell you about your crime novel when they read it? I mean, what kind of feedback can you share with me?
Um, people love them. I mean, the character is a little bit, again, a little bit different. He has Caribbean roots, but he's an American. He was born here, um, and um, um, I've only done 3 novels so far, but they're set in some mostly Caribbean area of Brooklyn. Again, most people don't have a good sense of what that is, and and but they're also exciting and full of action. And so the reception is from people who've read them have always been good. They've always expressed pleasure at you know um, the ones who've read both are always confused because they find it hard um, to connect the two, but 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 the novels have from for people who have read them have always they've always felt like they've enjoyed them.
Why did they find it difficult? Is that intentional on your part, or is that is their own interpretation?
I think it's that people, you know, they'll people have a capacity, I guess, to misunderstand just how expansive our minds can be, and so they tend to put you in a box. Once you've established something of a certain sensibility, they have a hard time allowing you to get out of that space. Um, so I think that's really them not realizing that writing is storytelling is storytelling. You just need to understand the parameters of the story that you want to tell, or establish the parameters that you want to tell. Fiction, I mean, crime fiction has a certain set of parameters that you want to stay within um, because there's a specific goal that you have at the end of the novel, and that is to solve a crime. Most other fiction don't have that. I mean, there's a story that you're telling, of course, and there's a goal to unravel everything about the characters by the end, or leave them in mystery if that's your intention. But crime fiction's goal is always specific on almost every crime novel. At the end, we must discover who created this havoc that we've read through, and that's really all it is. It's just that the parameters are very specific, and once you stay within them, it's just like writing any other novel. You know what I mean? But people don't. They have a hard time seeing that because they think that there's some special, skill that's needed to write that particular kind of novel, or a lack of skill. I don't know. But it's to me, it's all I can write just about anything if I put my mind to it. I've written erotic fiction. I mean, why is erotic fiction any different to crime fiction? It's about people having sex. So you can, so why can't you write about people who are criminals and solving a crime?
All right. Now, how do you sort of glue your audience to your writing? I'm trying to understand, how do you get your writing to be more interesting to the reader?
Mm. I think the key to any storytelling is to have compelling characters. You know what I mean? I think when people hear the word storytelling, they think, well, you're telling a story and it's about, no. The story is about people. It's about characters. And I mean, your primary purpose as a storyteller is to entertain. So you have to have characters that are believable, even if it's characters that are not human characters. It doesn't really matter. People have to accept them as they are, but you have to um, and you have to find a way to keep them always interested in what the characters are doing, or what the characters are going to do next, which is why it's easier to write a crime novel than most other novels, because you know that you have to find something at the end of a chapter. For instance, you have to have this cliffhanger so that they want to know she's finished there, what's happening next. um, so that's, to me, that's really the important thing, is that if you have characters who are compelling and you find a way of putting them in scenes or scenarios that force the reader or listener to sit up and wonder what is going to happen next, um, then you've done most of your job. You've got them interested in what's coming next, because that's all it's about. What is going to happen next? How, I'm entertained by all of the different scenarios that you're creating, but where is it going, and what's going to happen next? Um so that's how I approach every kind of writing that I do, whether it's fiction or whether it's drama. It's always about uh, what is going to happen next, and are these characters compelling enough that I'm really interested in their lives anyway. And so people sometimes have these fanciful ideas about writing stories, and they forget that the stories are really about characters. It's about characters in a situation, whatever these characters are, and these characters have to be compelling. And they forget, they have this great idea of what, the story, this thing happened and they went to the moon and they discovered something, and then they flew back to Earth and the Earth was poisoned. I mean, it's a great story, but who are the characters? Who are the people involved? And if you don't create characters that can really um, make people invest in knowing what it is they're doing and what's going to happen to them, then your story is never going to really, be resonant. It's not going to resonate with the reader or the listener. It's all about the characters.
And if it doesn't resonate, it's not going to work.
Right, exactly. That's true. It's all about creating the character that's compelling, and then you can tell any story on top of that. If these characters are not compelling, how wonderful your story is not going to matter, because you don't have a. It's like trying to create a dress or a shirt without any thread, any seams. It's just a piece of cloth. It's not going to look like a dress. You still need the thread to connect the pieces and hold it up. You know what I mean?
Where can people find your book? This is very important. Please share with them very briefly.
All of my books are available on Amazon. So you just, and we can order them wherever you are in the world on Amazon. That's the great thing about Amazon. Whether you're in Italy, whether you're in Spain, whether you're in Germany, you can just go on Amazon and just order the books, and it'll get you wherever you are.
That's interesting. Thank you so much for that. Now, to wrap up this conversation today, what would be your final thoughts to it? And of course, like we often do here, we don't usually finish the entire conversation in one sitting. We're going to come back to it again to look at some other area relating to your storytelling. So for today, what would be your final thought?
I think that there's some debate, I guess. Well, a lot of debate, I guess, still going on today, even though it's probably hard not to prove it now, about the value of art and storytelling in 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 society. Societies who don't value it or who don't encourage it. But I think one of the things that most people, I think, would agree is that there's a moral case to be made for storytelling as a way for people to come together, for a way of people to understand each other, for a way for people to um, keep the spirit of love and unity flowing through humanity, because art is about showing us how we can be human, and what is human about us in a um in a in a common way. So I think it's incumbent upon storytellers to continue um, to follow their urge and to discover and find all the elements that they need to create compelling stories and to deliver them to people, because you're already also delivering people from fear. Because once you know the story, once you understand the true story, then you're no longer afraid of what's not there. So that would be my my final thoughts. Just to storytellers all over the world, wherever you are, just continue to find the way to show that we're all human.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you in the next episode.